Well, welcome. My name is Jeffrey Crump. I'm here from sunny Arizona, where the day I left it was 113 degrees, so I was very happy to leave. Yes, that's very, very hot. Yes. Today's topic, we're going to talk about this thing called the CMMC, which is a new Department of Defense cybersecurity program. And because obviously we're here in Europe, we have to put this in the context of NIS2. And so that's what this session is about, to help you really kind of understand how I'm connecting the dots in my brain, because there's a lot of this that's still to be determined. Which is not unlike NIS2, right? We have, we'll see that there are things in place. We have existing contract clauses that organizations have in the past have been responsible for signing on the dotted line saying, yes, we will do this stuff, but are they not? Well, the evidence has shown that for the most part they're not, okay? And so there are some similarities in that context. Certainly the focus on critical infrastructure, but the critical infrastructure in the United States is obviously we're one country, and the United European Union is many countries. So NIS2 applies to the greater EU, but as we really kind of talked about in yesterday's session, there's some complexity there because it's up to the member states on how this actually gets materialized and how it shows up. And so that's going to create potentially some challenges depending upon how the member states really kind of respond to that challenge. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Thought I was going to be walking around, so I thought it was going to be a little easier for my. All right, and then in the United States with the DoD, the size of the organization doesn't really matter. What's really at hand here is two types of information. This information that we call federal contract information and controlled unclassified information. And based upon that information are the size and the number of the controls, but also, as we'll see, how the organizations will be assessed themselves. So that's a factor. So size doesn't really matter when it comes to the CMMC. You can have large companies that deal with FCI, which has a smaller number of controls, or very small mom and pop shops that deal with controlled unclassified information. And so they're going to be burdened with 110 controls that come from NIS 801-71. Whereas obviously with NIS, we've got some other kinds of size factors come into play. The size of the organization, the number of employees, or the amount of revenue or turnover that's associated with that. So these are all things that we're going to have to really kind of balance as this CMMC thing begins to, firm up and make its way out across the borders outside of the United States, and it already has. As I was saying, the reason I'm a little bit late is we've got a client over in Taiwan, and so having to really kind of get things ready and prepared for those organizations over there. So fundamentally, what we have in common is accountability. And that's what these two programs are designed to do. It's just maybe what we've learned with regard to the DoD, or not the, I'm not speaking on behalf of the DoD, I'm not the DoD, I don't represent the DoD. But we have the evidence that this trust model doesn't always work out how we'd like, right? And so we have to shift to a verify model. And that's what's happening. But we're not doing for all organizations. The CMMC itself, right? What they've done is they were like, well, geez, for several years now, we've had these contract clauses where you, the contractor, have agreed that we will do these certain types of things with regard to the security controls. But, they look out and they go, gee, there's this jet flying around over the top of Beijing that looks awful familiar. right? Very, very familiar to our F-35. So do we have an issue here? Are we losing information? And the answer is yes, absolutely. The evidence is soaring above you in the skies. And this is a problem because, certainly we're concerned about the value, roughly $9 billion worth of IP floating out the door. But the last thing we want is our warfighters, our humans, up in the sky thinking they have a strategic advantage only to find themselves face to face with an equally technology advantaged adversary. And then we have the risk of loss of life. And that's truly, really, really kind of matters for us, right? So we have this, plus the group that prior to the CMMC becoming really a thing is we have this group within the DoD that goes out and they do these really kind of ad hoc assessments of organizations, but they're a very small team and they can only do so many. But when they have done them, what they have found is that the contractors themselves either are not aware of this contract clause that calls into effect the requirement to put the security controls in place, or the ones that have actually been assessed, 4 out of 10 of them, less than that, are actually satisfying the controls. So you have the contractors themselves who are admitting to you, hey, we don't even know about the requirements themselves, right? Despite having multiple contract clauses to have these in place. So this is clearly a problem. So the CMMC, we're now in the second iteration, CMMC 2.0, but we're actively going through a rulemaking process. So the CMMC 1, when it first came out, every company, all 320,000 companies within the defense industrial base were going to have to go through an assessment of one of 3 levels. What in the CMMC 1.0, there was level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but level 2 and level 4 were really just kind of transitional levels, never really going to be assessments. So as you likely recall, in the winter of 2020, we had an election, right? And as often happens in our organizations and our governance, when we have an election and there's a transition of leadership, then we have change, right? New ideas, new programs, and things like that. An open ear, right, to the ecosystem. And so with new leadership coming into the DoD, then we ended up 9-10 months later with a CMMC 2.0, where it's optimized. So we're down to 3 levels now, and we've taken the burden off some of the smaller organizations, typically, that sit at this level 1, where they're only dealing with this federal contract information. So they are going to be able to continue to self-assess. But they're self-assessing against 17 of the 110 controls. At level 2 and level 3, what's really kind of happening is, I told you that group that was doing the assessments today, they're a small team, they can only do so many. They were doing about 100 a year or so. Well, they really would like to, if they could, do about 20,000 a year. So it's impractical. So oftentimes what happens in the US, when the government needs help, they go to private industry. So they went out, they put this $0 proposal out there for organizations to build an ecosystem. And that's what's happening today, is we have this ecosystem that's being built by an organization that was originally called the CMMC accreditation body. Now we refer to them as the Cyber AV. And they're building an ecosystem of people that can go out and conduct assessments. So we're really kind of an extension of the DoD to help them conduct these validation assessments. And so PECB, as we kind of talked about yesterday, is part of that ecosystem because they're developing the training content that is utilized by me and my company and companies like mine that are licensed training providers to train not just people on how to become assessors, and that's really kind of an optional path because the training is open to anybody, but also the organizations. So when I look across the students that have come to my training, roughly 60% are people that are going to go off and become assessors, or at least that's their goal. The other 30% are organizations themselves, the ones that are going to be assessed, because they want to understand, well, what is this going to be like? What's this experience? What is this team going to do when they come on site? What are the expectations? And so they're preparing themselves for that experience. And the other 10%, these are people that are out there, they just need some kind of a knowledge. They might work for private, public entities that need to consult or just be able to have an intelligent conversation about this CMMC. So, one of the things to consider is that the CMMC is really kind of a wrapper around these contractual clause obligations. The security, the requirements are really kind of called out in this thing called DFARS 252.204-7012. That's not really a big deal, the name of that thing, but what's in it. It covers two fundamental things. One is safeguarding something called cover defense information. And what that is just the DoD's controlled unclassified information. It's the controlled unclassified information, the stuff that we, the DoD, are sharing with our contractors. If it's in that relationship, then we're going to call that cover defense information. This whole bigger program around controlled and classified information, that was established, years ago for the entire federal government. So what the DoD has done is they've implemented that program in their agency. Okay, so in 7012, the safeguards include NIST 800-171. But there's also considerations around cloud, because 800-171 traditional controls really didn't have the cloud in mind. And so we have this requirement for something called the equivalency of FedRAMP moderate. And what that is if FedRAMP is a program designed predominantly for companies that want to sell their cloud solutions to the federal government. So if you want to do that, you have to go through this security validation program that's completely separate called FedRAMP. So because we know that, well, that's a long and that's an expensive process, and not every cloud provider has that vision in mind. When it comes to DFARS 7012, you're allowed to have this equivalency of 7012 or equivalency of FedRAMP moderate. So you've got these security controls around that, and the other half of 7012 is around incident reporting. And it's, on the surface, it's pretty straightforward. Things that you would do. You have something, okay, I've got an alert, I need to investigate. If I do an investigation, it includes this information called CDI, or it includes an asset the process stores, transmits CDI. I need to investigate that. And if I investigate it and I come across some malware, okay, we need to submit that to the DoD. We need to let them know we've had an incident. And then let's take a snapshot because they might want to come and do an investigation, deeper investigation themselves, the DoD. Right? So pretty straightforward. The way that 7012 ends up working its way down through the supply chain is a clause in there that we refer to as the flow down clause. So a prime or a sub or a sub to another sub, as we get down to the multiple tiers within the supply chain, if as part of this contract relationship, if I need to share with you some of this CUI, then I have to flow this clause down to you so that now you are equally responsible for these controls. And then if you need to flow some of that down to your subs, you have to flow it down, flow it down, flow it down. If, right? So if I have to flow this down to you. So that's why we have the primes and all the contractors shouting out to the defense industrial base contractors, go get your certificate, go get your certificate, go get your certificate. Not because necessarily of the 7012 flow down, because it's missing a key element. It's really, and they do this on occasion, it's really, I'm not a big fan of it, but they kind of set some expectations. Well, is an expectation a requirement? You got all these lawyers sitting in DC, crafting word by word every single paragraph of a clause, and they make a conscious decision, expectation or requirement. Clearly, if it was a requirement, it'd be a requirement, right? But that's just my perspective. But sometimes they say expectation. Well, that changes in CMMC. They put in a word called ensure. Okay, now it's pretty clear, right? That the primes, the subs, before I'm going to give this information to you and your company, I have an obligation to make sure that you've received your certificate. So the ambiguity will be gone when this DFARS clause begins to kind of show up in contracts. So as we kind of move forward, so the way things have happened, and it's been a little bit of feels like a little bit of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 step forward, 1 step back, because in October of 2021, we finally began to really have some material to teach on and begin people going on this journey. But about 5 weeks after we got started, lo and behold, this out of the sky drops this thing called the way forward. And so they say, well, we looked at that CMMC thing you've got, and we're going to make some updates. We got this thing called the CMMC 2.0. And that's when we transition from the 5 levels to the 3 levels. The level 1's no longer in leading assessments, and now level 2's do, or level 2's, it begins really kind of there. So, so now we've been on this journey over the last, couple of years around teaching people about CMMC 2.0. But they've looked at that and they said, well, we think we can do better. And so we're now in the really kind of at the cusp of this, or in the middle of it, but depending on the material portion of this thing called rulemaking. So what happens is when the federal government, and the DoD including as part of that, when they have an idea if they need to do something or want to do something, invariably they've got some options on how they put that out there. And that's part of this rulemaking process. They'll put out a notice of proposed rulemaking, or they'll put out an interim rule, or they'll just say, hey, this is what's going to happen. We just jump straight to something called a final rule. Well, right now we're on this cusp of where this new, what we expect to be called the 2.1, is going to be put out, and we're going to have a 60-day public comment period. And then the DoD will go back, they'll take that information, they'll spend some time trying to figure out how to answer those questions, some good ideas, bad ideas, optimize this, and then they'll come back with likely an interim rule. And it's at that point where things will really begin to kick off. And we would expect that they will do a phased implementation, much like they were expected to do as part of CMMC 1.0. A small number of contracts will roll out in the first fiscal year, and then that number will grow as the ecosystem grows, right, year over year. And by the time we're 5 to 7 years down the road, every contract will include this new DFARS clause, 252.204-7021. And that's the one that will include the ensure element of there and the requirement for an independent certification or some evidence that an organization has done their own self-assessment. Okay? So that's where this is at. And so we're rapidly building an ecosystem. The latest, first time I've heard any numbers really kind of thrown out there around this, but sounds like the initial number of demand for actual certified assessors, this number is going to sound small to you, but 280 for the first set of contracts, 2025, or yeah. Doesn't sound like a lot, but we've been working on this for a while, and we're not even quite there. And as that number grows, it's going to get larger and larger and larger. So the demand just for assessors in the United States is going to be immense. And that doesn't even take into consideration that there are entities within this ecosystem that are not only focused on assessments, but to get organizations ready for the assessments. And so there's a massive cadre of people that we have to train to get prepared so they can help the organizations get ready. So a huge, huge number. If we're going to be doing effectively 14 in the US, 14 to 16,000 assessments on an annual basis. That's a lot. Okay, a lot by anybody's number. So as I mentioned, PCB is an LPP. They create the content. My company is a licensed training provider. We deliver the training, and we've done a lot of that. The focus, I've had multiple international students in my classrooms. There are people that see this coming. It's not going away. It's been around. It's been in the contract clauses. It's just now we're transitioning from trust to verify. So the demand is very large in the US. It's absolutely growing on an international basis, as I alluded to earlier. So there are classes out there, okay? So there really are two kinds of classes. Those that will help you get you on your journey and really kind of, if you just want an introduction to it, the PECB has the PECB CMMC Foundations. It's a 2-day class. And any of the PECB trainers who are authorized to train can deliver this content. But if you want to take that journey towards certification, the CCP class, that CMMC Certified Professional course, and then subsequently the assessor class, you have to work through a licensed training provider for those. So we have some sessions that are out there coming up in 2024 that are both based in Central European time or will actually be delivered in classroom. The first of those will be in Frankfurt. So it's coming. So I would just kind of open the door to any questions, and then also consider that we are also looking for partners or people that want that have customers in the defense supply chain to chat. Okay, all right. Okay, we got any one question? Going once, going twice? Well, that makes it easy. All right, brilliant. Thank you everyone for your patience.